My Lords, I think we actually should thank the Noble Lady Baroness Gerarda and the Noble Lady Baroness Pigeon for raising important counters to a lot of the contributions, because it is important that we don't fetishise face-to-face as infallible. Face-to-face communication is no guarantee that comprehension happens, that people listen, or there isn't misunderstanding. And we should know that because we sit face-to-face in this committee every Friday, and goodness knows it hasn't guaranteed much of that. But I've put my name on several amendments because I think that, despite what the Noble Lady Baroness Pigeon just said about 6 months to live and we must make it as easy as possible, the sponsors of this bill rightly have built into the bill the need for eligibility to be. You can't just wander in and say, I've got 6 months to live, get rid of me. You have to pass the eligibility assessment, and we're trying to work out whether a default of face-to-face would be a better way of guaranteeing that there's no abuse, which I think is a reasonable thing. I remember, actually, that ITV documentary, first referenced by the Noble Lady Baroness Coffey, when I heard the bill's sponsor in the other place, Kim Ledbetter, admit that she was uncomfortable by what has been labelled death by Zoom, the model that she was watching in Oregon. And it was actually, despite what the Noble Lady Baroness Gerarda said, it was actually she, Kim Ledbetter, who rightly noted that it looked too much like a tick box exercise. And I do think that we need to be wary of anything that goes in that direction. But because that's what I watched on that documentary, I expected that, therefore, on the face of the bill, there would be a requirement, a basic requirement for face-to-face unless in exceptional circumstances. And so I would ask the Noble and Learned Lord to respond as to why the bill still permits so many encounters with doctors, including the panel, to be conducted remotely, which just means that somebody would actually access assisted death without having seen face-to-face the doctor. And that just seems, at least one might pause. And despite the virtues of telemedicine, and there are many virtues, and we can all see all the reasons why on occasion it's important, just like we all use Zoom meetings and so on, it's a question of whether it's superior or can be relied on. And I think that the Noble Lady Baroness Smith of Newnham really described vividly why Baroness Jay's contribution, saying at least the Lady Gerarda knows what it's like to be the doctor who's doing the consultation. Well, some of us know what it's like to be the patient on the other end of it. And to be honest, it's not always as, trust the experts and all that, but... and there are absolutely crossed wires hanging around, the frustration of it, all sorts of things can go wrong. And I do think when Professor Martin Vernon, Chair of the Ethics and Law Special Interest Group at the British Geriatric Society, says, quote, assessing somebody remotely, digitally, without a face-to-face assessment, particularly if they have complex health and social care needs, is nigh on impossible. I'd also think that there's something in that too that we should consider. Non-face-to-face, Zoom or phone or whatever encounters are particularly challenging for particular groups. Those with communications difficulties. The Noble Baroness Lady Nicholson reminded us of the difficulties, or raised the issues, of people with hearing difficulties in a previous group. We all know that there are difficulties of language. And of course, older people are likely to make up the majority of those being assessed for assisted dying. And without caricaturing oldies as being technically illiterate, there's a smidgen of truth there. But I think there's also something else. Older people on the phone sometimes present their best selves. I mean, they put on their best voice. There's nothing wrong with this, but they're kind of, chat away as though everything is fine. And even on Zoom, kind of sit there looking their best. When you actually see them, I'm not now talking about being a doctor assessing them, but then when you see them face to face, they're dishevelled, they're pale, they're frail. It's something else happens. And I do think because the assisted dying decision involves highly emotional and existential issues, purely remote assessments potentially undermine the relationships, the relational aspects of care that will help ensure that decisions are well considered and autonomously made, and that we've got to think about that direct personal interactions, because the noble Lady Baroness J is right. It's the last 6 months of your life, allegedly, but that's what you've been told. People are vulnerable and distressed and they're not quite sure. And all I'm suggesting, all that these amendments are suggesting, is that possibly we're better to see the doctor. Now, if you can't get there, that's all fine. Nobody's been inhumane. But that you go, the doctor sees you and assesses what's going on in order to, it's a necessary, if not sufficient, way of establishing the eligibility criteria. Now, finally, the noble Lord MP talked about, it might be appropriate for online legal proceedings, that might work. But I think actually it's worth noting this. And I'm sure the noble and learned Lord will be aware of the evidence in relation to the use of video links in court proceedings and trials. In Transform Justice's survey of court users, 70% of respondents said it was difficult to recognise whether someone who was on video had a disability, while 74% believed that those who had no legal representation were disadvantaged by appearing on video. In other words, the vulnerable always suffer in those instances. And the report similarly found that there were significant issues in assessing evidence and character. And so I think we can learn from other jurisdictions as well, or other areas. But the main thing I would say is default should be face-to-face, should be on the face of the bill. I agree with Kim Ledbetter. That's a headline on that one. I just don't understand why, having Kim Ledbetter noted that, it's not on the face of the bill. And of course, there should be exceptions if people are too ill or too far away or having a ball for the last 6 months in Tenerife. Yes, we get all that. But it's the default point is face-to-face where possible, as much as possible.